Okay. So where do we want to start on this one?
It's a very interesting topic, and I can see it covering like several different sort of vectors within the overarching a topic itself. Like there's the responsibility to deliver a finished product, like something that is actually complete and does what it says it does. And then there's the responsibility of maintaining that product and making sure it continues to do what it says it does. And then there's the responsibility of making sure that other players don't stop players from being able to do it.
Yeah, it's
That would probably go under maintenance.
yeah, like there's kind of like a mix between consumer responsibility, societal responsibility, and a personal responsibility that kind of goes into a lot of this stuff. And they're all kind of different depending on like games are, genre wise and just the art itself is pretty vast. Like there's a huge difference between, a free game that someone made in Flash and threw up on the web for people to enjoy versus, a AAA full price, 1,000-person studio. And then as well as the differences between single player and multiplayer games. I feel like there's actually quite a bit of differences in responsibility between those, and like a lot of different kind of areas, even just between, the game designer and the, creator of a product given to a consumer as well as that. So we can kind of maybe break things up a little bit to the different kind of vectors and areas of games and games design and the different kind of responsibilities that may fall into those.
You read my mind. I was going to say, well, let's put some specifications down on what we're actually talking about and limit the scope of what we're talking about here. So we're specifically talking about games the person has paid for. Stuff you've put money into. Because if you're just like going and finding a free game on the net that nobody's had you pay for and you just downloaded it and played it, there's absolutely no responsibility at all to the developer. He doesn't know you shit. You've downloaded a free product, and we don't care. I mean, if it nukes your computer, that's on you. Don't download those things.
Yeah, I mean, we could still talk about those, like the free and indie games briefly, and just say that because it is still part of the overall arc of the responsibility. And I still think it's neat that, if it's indie or a free game, it's more of just the kind of raw art from the creator. Mm-hmm. And they don't really have much of responsibility to their consumer because, it's usually passion projects for themselves. They put it up there for people to enjoy, but really they don't really owe you anything. It's their vision, their product. You didn't pay for it. There's not really too much of an entitlement in regards to how it is. But there are certain things in societal sense of, you can create offensive art and offensive media and put it up there, and you still kind of have a responsibility to, not be a dick in that sense.
That's a good point.
So there's still there's still certain things where there's no consumer protection, but there's still the societal kind of responsibility of, don't create hate speech, none of that stuff, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And if you feel the need to, you should probably, talk to someone. Not to sound like condescending, but actually, like, if you feel the need, if you see the need that, like, it's, it's not healthy. Like, it's not
if you've got that much hatred in your life, then there's something you need to work through. Like and it'll make your life better. This is not saying, hey, you're a shitter for being a hateful person. It's, genuine concern of there's probably something in your life that you need to deal with.
Yeah.
Usually that's taught behavior.
Yeah, well, because that's kind of the neat thing about art is it allows us to, communicate in a way that, isn't always direct or isn't always, just through talking. And I'm not going to list any of them because, I really don't like them, but there are games out there that are basically just a game version of hate speech. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And they're, incredibly offensive, and, people who made them, either made them because they thought, maybe it was funny, or they like to push boundaries, or, maybe they actually have some stuff going on. And it's one of those things where, you still have a responsibility to, the community and, the viewers or the people who are going to participate in it to, not kind of poison the pond per se. So if you're there, if you feel like you have the need to, please, talk to someone, try and figure out why those feelings are there, and not kind of let it try to be like an outlet and put that in there. Or, if you feel like you really have to, please don't try to, upload it to somewhere where, there's a lot of other kind of games that don't have, that kind of stuff going on, because you do have a responsibility there.
GlenCon would like you to repeat the three responsibility pillars that you named there. I will write them down as well.
I named I named 3 responsibilities. Sorry, it's kind of stream of consciousness. I'm waking up here.
He forgot to buffer his consciousness stream, so he cannot recall those data points.
Yeah.
I think it's societal, consumer, and then personal, I believe is what I said.
That sounds right.
If I'm remembering correctly. Yes.
That sounds right anyway.
SCP.
Oh god, oh no. What have I done?
Shit. Yeah. So I guess we're still developing. What? Biddy Love. You're welcome, Glenn. Well, we won't look at the. Maybe I can do this actually. And we can classify the responsibilities that way even, and break them down. Do our best to actually say where they belong. So where do we want to actually start after defining these? Do we want to just choose one?
Well, I've got one that's sort of burning a hole in my pocket, so to speak, which is game studios that release a full-priced product that does not do what they say it will do. Like
how about we do an order instead of just grabbing random ones that do it, and just start at the beginning and like delivery responsibilities?
Why don't we? I have an idea of maybe the structure to go through. Maybe we'll just kind of jot on a bit of an outline. But I like the idea of maybe starting from like free or cheaper, smaller games and work our way up to the kind of larger games to kind of have that idea of, kind of the raw of the art form before it becomes, kind of the mass-produced kind of consumer-driven product. And
Sure.
kind of seeing the differences between those. And then special topics in that I would like to talk about, as Rage was saying, the kind of marketing spiel that happens a lot of times for that, high-end product, as well as like to touch on Kickstarter games. And, because Kickstarter kind of goes in between a lot of indie games, and there's a lot of times, where even though you're a smaller team in a small indie studio, when you start doing stuff like that and you start committing to stuff, your responsibility grows. Even if it's a free game or a really cheap game, the moment that, you start putting marketing spiel onto it, or you start promising things, you are going to have a responsibility. Even if it's not consumer because it's free, you still, you're promising things to people who are backing you, either with their, motivation or support or financial. You do
Kickstarter is a big thing. That takes it to another level. I was thinking following the life cycle of the software, just because that's where my mind went. But I'm good with following the sizes up, because the responsibility will definitely change as the studio grows and as the budget goes up. Budget changes things.
Put a random list.
Yeah.
I'm gonna put contents for now. I don't know. Words are really hard. I've been meant to wake up earlier, but New World has become a problem.
Yes.
You grind to full, and then you're like, all right, now I can start
the gear grind, which is even longer than the level grind. Oh man, the way they did the gear grind is insane and stupid, and fuck that. So while he's typing that, Rage, it's not based on what gear you have or have acquired. It's based on what gear has dropped. And every time it drops a little tiny bit stronger. So you need to get like 1,000 pairs of boots to drop before you start getting the good endgame ones.
That would annoy the hell out of me. I'm glad I'm not playing that game.
But you see, the thing is, the economy is such trash that as soon as you hit 60, you can just go to the marketplace and buy like near top end level 60 gear to get you ready to go into those areas where you can grind to the top end elites for pennies. Because the people that have been grinding
not interested.
I'm not saying you should be. I'm just pointing out the hilariousness. Because the people that have been grinding for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours to get their gear score up now get high-end gear dropping all the time that they don't really need, and it doesn't really sell on the market. So it's like 50 gold a piece.
Yeah,
that's all it is.
I bought like a lot of my good gear right when I hit 60, and there's not many people who are 60 yet, so it's only going to get like worse. And then I the way that you kind of do is you like grind these like elite areas, but they're not instanced, so you can just show up in a squad of like 50 to 100 people, and you just run like you just there's constant stream of players running through it to the point where like you don't even really get experience or drops. There's just like chests you loot, which give like regions for crafting, but then they broke the economy because everyone who was there got 1,000 of each, which is a lot in weight, and weight is a really important thing. So people are just dumping it on the market. So like the tier 5 refining mats are going for pennies, while the tier 1 and tier 2 were still going for like gold, like full solid things. And it's like, ooh, this is interesting. And then as Deus was saying, you have to grind your gear. So like you'll drop boots, and every time boots will drop, they'll go within a range, and the more and more that they drop, it'll go up. So like if you need a chest piece, you gotta kind of just get a bunch of chest pieces to drop, which
it's got no relation to what you're wearing. So you can have great gear on, and it's just crap gear dropping, getting slightly better when you've gone and bought like the best stuff that anyone on the server can get for like a couple gold.
It's a very, very
it's a fucked up economy right there. It's ass backwards.
Yeah, and there's no real money sink either. So like, I think besides war, I think declaring war, but it's kind of cheap. Grand scheme of things. So it'll be interesting to see. But anyway,
the game's fucked. We can talk more about it when we get to the AAA responsibilities. Promises and responsibilities. Yeah, that'll come up more because that's a good example of a lot of crap. Despite how many hours we've put into it.
I feel like it's sort of Tarkov for me, or Destiny 2 for GlenCon, where it's very much like there's a good game in there somewhere.
No.
Tarkov is at least pretty good with their economy. Things get fairly balanced, and their grind gets kind of bad. I think they lowered Kappa again.
15
now.
They did.
Oh, Kappa?
They did. They lowered it again, and they also lowered market access to 15.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I remember that market change, and like that's because like that grind to 71, because like you hit that point where you're in like your 40s, and you're hitting 50, and like 50 is a reasonable target. Like 50 is very, very doable if you it's you get to the point where the grind is so far away that it's unreasonable, and you feel hopeless, right? Like, I'm gonna have to play how much to get there?
Anyway, back on topic.
GlenCon says, I keep saying Destiny 2 has really fun gameplay, and the gameplay loop pulls people away from the gameplay. Oh, gunplay. Gunplay? Or gameplay? Oh, gunplay. Really fun gunplay. There we go. And the gameplay loop pulls people away from the gunplay. The gunplay in it is okay, I found. I much preferred meleeing. I liked running around and punching things. That was a lot of fun. If you do get Destiny 2, let us know, Pseudo. We'll jump in and play some with you.
Sure.
Yeah.
We've got it already. All right. Indie then. Indie. Let's get it kicked off.
Games. I also threw prototypes on there too, because that's kind of a big thing that came up with VR recently. And VR might be kind of an interesting one to talk about, which I didn't think about until now. But there's a whole new kind of area when we actually... One thing I forgot.
Note to self. Let's do a VR panel coming up in the future sometime where we actually talk about what's going on in the VR and how it's kind of put together. And
almost forgot to put that, which was in my notes.
Since we've all done VR enough.
Yeah, I think that'd be cool. I think that I'd like that because it's a real interesting area.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I put prototypes there is because that's kind of most of what VR is right now, is everyone just kind of doing prototypes. There aren't really a lot of AAA games. And even Valve's game, which is probably one of the closest things we have to AAA, still feels a bit more of, AA. It's not very long. And then we saw with...
You're really low on the volume there.
Let me just move this actually close to my mouse. And then like the new Medal of Honor game that was released by Respawn and EA for VR, which was a full-price game. We kind of saw a bit of pullback in looking at it, and it looks pretty solid. I've been meaning to try it out, but even myself, I'd had a hard time justifying spending, full price on a VR game, because so far the market right now does feel, prototyping tech demos, and am I going to get that kind of, the money's worth kind of out of that, or do I wait for a significant sale?
Probably not.
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing to talk about, what a prototype kind of is in this regard, and indie and free. So I guess we can maybe split those up, start with indie.
Yep.
And then kind of branch into, free games and prototypes, because a lot of indie studios will kind of create those as they go.
For sure. So let's start with indie games, and let's try to hear at least a couple things from the peanut gallery out there. What do you really feel an indie game owes you when you buy it? What sort of things do you fully expect from it? Does it owe you anything at that point?
I mean, there's going to be the big thing that I keep harping on is it needs to do what it says on the tin, and that definitely goes under consumer responsibility. Like, there have been quite a few games recently that have delivered a game that does not do what it says on the tin, like the fact that No Man's Sky launched with no multiplayer code in it.
I would just like to quickly add that if you watch our show, you would know ahead of time, before that game ever comes out, how it's going to be, because we actually knew exactly what it was going to be like when it came out, and we called it from the beginning.
Oh yeah,
it's a good case study. Actually, we can bring up like
it is.
So we can actually talk about that, because that's a big part of what this kind of topic is their responsibility, and they're an indie studio, so what do they really owe, and kind of what happened with that, and all that kind of good stuff. Because at some point they just started straight up lying, and maybe they didn't realize they were lying. Maybe they got caught up in maybe it's the game they wanted to make, and we'll talk about how eventually they got there. But I still don't really like the way that they did it.
I wouldn't call that setting expectations, GlenCon, as much as just marketing accuracy.
Tell you what it actually does, because at launch their marketing team lied.
Yeah, it was a straight out lie.
It did not do the things that marketing said it did.
It's beyond setting expectations. It is straight up lying to the consumer. Marketing accuracy. And there are a lot of companies that get put into a whole lot of fucking trouble for doing stuff like that. So I don't think they should have gotten away with it as much as they did. Who cares if they fixed it later?
Yeah, and it was one of those things too, where a kind of a common complaint I found when that game launched is that it should have been like a $20 game for what was there.
Yep.
Which, a lot of people may not, like, they can feel that way, but a lot of times they don't always understand why they feel that way, which is hopefully something we can kind of clarify here.
For sure.
Which is kind of like, the comparison of price, per content, or, let's just do it hours per play or entertainment is kind of the gist of things. And that's something that, like, it's not always just the hours you get, but the kind of, you're buying something to, put time into or get something out of, and is it going to be worth what you spend, which is one thing I've always loved about indie games is they're, unfortunately, a lot of them are so underpriced. For like $10, you get hundreds of hours of stuff out of it, and
usually pretty good.
Yeah,
good hours.
You wish it would have cost more, but then you think about if it costed more, the chances of you actually picking it up would have been very low, and then if it costed more, you would have expected more, and you maybe not would have put all those hours in, and it's very complicated. It gets very, very, very complicated, like very, very quickly, especially if it's like community-driven content, something like Gary's Mod or
Skyrim.
Oh God, Skyrim is its own thing. Skyrim would be an interesting thing to talk about here.
Yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there.
So No Man's Sky, for people who aren't aware, I think I have to double check. I don't know if they were crowdfunded. I remember there was a lot of pre-orders. I don't know if they had a Kickstarter. I think they may have.
Yeah, they had some sort of crowdfunding for No Man's Sky.
I remember that they were independent. They had some sort of crowdfunding, either through a lot of pre-orders or through something like Kickstarter. And basically what started happening is they were really, like, they were trying to, I guess, get a bit more money to work on the game, and they started letting their marketing teams run a bit wild. And I think it was one of the people who was running the studio maybe didn't have a lot of marketing experience, or maybe didn't take a marketing or business ethics course.
He may not have had any business experience, period. And you know what? When a business and company starts rolling, even if you're the head of it, it's easy to lose track of what the left hand is doing, what the right hand is doing. If you're not familiar with what's going on, if you've never done it before, it is way harder than you think. I've tried to do it before. It's so much to watch. It gets way easy on you. And I feel for the guy on that front, but that doesn't mean it takes anything away from what they did.
Yeah. So what was basically happening is, the main thing that we were saying, what we noticed or stood out to us, was when they started talking about multiplayer. Because a lot of people were asking multiplayer, because that's the kind of game that they were envisioning is, we get to explore space with friends, we get to explore space with people, and they didn't want to just say no because, it's a negative, okay, now this game's not there, or maybe they'll lose interest. They really want to capitalize on that. And
They definitely would have lost sales and customers.
yeah.
100%.
And it's something that, maybe they thought, hey, we need to add this to our game. It's not ready for it now, but we need to do it. And the one thing that kind of stood out for most developers, in the sense, was when they started talking about multiplayer closer to launch. Before launch, or even closer to the deadline, they were really talking about, oh, you're able to do this. Oh, yeah, there'll be multiplayer. And then when we started getting closer to launch, they started kind of rolling back things and started saying things that, kind of make sense for people who, maybe aren't technical under the hood or know what's going on. But for people with a technical background, it doesn't make, any sense. And the main thing was,
Big red
yeah, we have
flag.
multiplayer, but the chances of you running into another player are very, very, very slim. And the huge red flag with this is that when you're making video games, if you're making a single player game, the architecture is a lot simpler than multiplayer. If you're making multiplayer, you basically need to be, managing a lot more stuff, because you need a server to handle all the connections, all the players going to communicate. There's a whole lot of stuff that goes on top of it. And basically what they said is, oh, we made this infrastructure that can handle multiplayer, but we're not going to use it ever. We have all this stuff, all this effort, all this time and money went into it, but, maybe one or two people out of the whole player base will ever experience it. And that was a huge red flag, because why would you do that? So right when they said that, I'm like, okay, they don't have multiplayer. There's no way, unless they have some weird, like, hack together kind of, thing afterwards, where maybe it sends your player data to another, single player instance for like a little bit to kind of give the illusion that, there's real time multiplayer. But that's something that needs to be done on an architecture level, like way before, during the design process of the game. And then sure enough, when the game launched, people found out that no, it's not multiplayer. And eventually that some people found they got to the same area in a similar seed and they couldn't find each other. And people, of course, started checking networking, and it's like, yeah, there's no networking. There's nothing being sent in between. There's no, server. It's a single player game. So
Just
right there.
for the record, it wasn't just Pseudo that said that. All three of us said that individually without ever talking to each other.
Yeah,
It was that fucking obvious.
Yeah, it was a really big thing. There was, like, as soon as they said, like, as soon as that article went up, a lot of people and a lot of videos started going up being like, yeah, we think this is going to be a bit of a shit show. So there was, the marketing accuracy was completely false. People are going to spend money on that game. I think it launched at like $40 or something. So not full price, but kind of close to it. Because I think, at least for us then, games were still $60. So it was, up there. It was a bit more of a, expectation being set. So they lied there, basically just straight up, falsified the product, and that, it is kind of fraud. Eventually, they
honestly, if they hadn't done that, if they hadn't said that there would be multiplayer, people probably would have been pretty happy with the game.
Yeah, there was still, yeah. Then the other thing that kind of happened with No Man's Sky, its launch, like the quality, the quality of the product, especially when it comes to games, kind of relates to, how stable is it? How stable, how polished, all that kind of stuff. And if I remember correctly, it didn't launch the greatest either. There was quite a few issues that were going out.
It had stability problems. It had performance problems. There was not enough to do in the game. There wasn't as much to do in the game as they promised. And then, as you said, they said nobody. So the exact story that Pseudo was talking about, if you want the fine, gritty details, it was actually two streamers that noticed they were in the same sector. And they're like, oh my God, we're close to each other. Let's go meet up. This is going to be awesome. And they went to the same zone. And they went to the same planet. And they circled around the planet. And they hovered over the same place in the same planet. And they were the only ones there. And they went, something's broken. And it turns out it wasn't broken. It was just the way they made it.
Yeah, it was bad. Yeah, there was that and a bunch of other stuff. And like I said, the quality, wasn't a great launch. It was very, buggy and messy, and it was just, it's one of the things where I think it's the studio's Hello Games. I believe it was their first game. It was a bunch of, they're not new to game making. I believe it was some seasoned developers who formed the studio to make it. But when you're your own
Studio's
studio,
first game, not their
Yeah.
as a people first game. A lot of people confuse that one. Like, oh, it's their first game. Like, it's not their first game. They know what they're doing. It's just the first thing they've done together as a studio. It's not their first project.
Yeah. But with a studio, and then especially with publishers, it's a kind of a big thing that publishers do is they make sure there's a certain quality of stuff that goes out. Because you know what happens if it doesn't. So you'll see this a lot with studios' first games. Is even though you're made a lot of games before, there's a big difference between working on a game and making a game and then shipping and publishing it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so what happened with No Man's Sky is they promised big. They charged a bit more than they should. And a lot of people's complaints were, if it was a $20 game, it would have been it probably would have been a lot more well received. The content that was there would have satisfied that kind of $20 mark. I think what a lot of people do with games, they kind of do like. They do it like dollars per hour. There was a long time where people try to compare it to movies, but movies are a lot more expensive and a different kind of experience than games. Games have always kind of traditionally been cheaper, even though they're a lot more can be a lot more expensive to make nowadays, but take longer to consume. But that $20 to $40 range, like the responsibility and the kind of guarantee that the association that goes with that is quite a bit different. I'll try to pull up some examples real quick of games that are $20 and $40 that are still within that indie range. I think Killing Floor 2 might fall into that range.
I think it was $40. Yeah.
On launch. And then
Factorio is 34.
But I mean, there's significant problems with trying to judge a game based on hours per dollar.
Yeah.
Like, I've paid $60 for a game that lasted 8 hours and gone, wow, that was one of the best games I've ever played.
There's definitely a quality aspect to be taken in. It is not a pure quantity thing. There's good hours and bad hours. Like, I played Fallout 4 and I sunk a whole lot of hours into it almost accidentally. Just because it takes so long to walk around and nothing ever actually challenges you. Nothing ever stops you. The only thing to make you stop is your own boredom when you go, oh, I've just been doing the same thing over and over again. I'm not saying it's, everybody's going to be bored with it. Some people that entertains them and it just relaxes their brain, and that's fine. But I still put a ton of hours into it and walked away going, why did I do that?
Yeah, like there's, let's see, what's a good example of something that I haven't played a ton of, but I loved? Deep Rock Galactic. Loved the hell out of that game. Only paid about 20 hours of it. Consider it worth every penny.
Still constantly think about it and go, we should do more Diggy Dwarves.
Yeah, there's still a bunch of content we haven't gotten to yet. I don't know if we've gotten to the, when you hit, is it 15 or 20 or something? With an item, you unlock like the deep depth stuff. And it's, yeah, it's, I agree with what Rage said, that like price per hour isn't really a good metric, because some games that are 4 to 8 hours can cost a lot, but they can be quite an extravagant experience. And then it also ranges between different people, because a lot of people don't have, I know myself, my attention span isn't always quite long for certain types of games. Doesn't mean I don't enjoy them. It just doesn't mean I'm going to get 40 hours of a game. But even if I pay $40 for it and I only play it for 5 or 8 hours, it might have been, a very entertaining number of that. Where if I'm playing a different game where I'm grinding for 5 to 8 hours, I still, paid the same. It's going to be a different quality of my time spent.
Or like, another game that I played recently, same sort of deal, Ghost Runner. I believe it was a $40 game. Took me under 10 hours to beat, after challenging myself to do it without using the time slowdown, because I was just like, these mechanics are just too satisfying. And again, worth every penny. Loved it. It was great.
Doom Eternal,
Like,
not the longest game. Unless you're playing it over and over and over and over and over again, you're not going to get an enormous ton of hours out of it. It's not a cheap game, but my God, that was a good game. I enjoyed every second of that game. Good God, that was a good game. I get to play it again soon.
Yeah. Honestly, like Ghost Runner, you can probably beat it in 6 hours on your first play. Would not surprise me. The only reason it took me so long is because I challenged myself immediately after the first stage and went, there's a slowdown? I don't need slowdown. I'm going to slice these bullets out of the air without the slowdown. And then it took me 10 hours to beat.
So we're kind of getting to that point, because we're talking about what the developer his responsibility to you? What he actually owes you? Does he owe you an enjoyable experience? If you're paying him and expecting an enjoyable experience, yes.
I think it gets a bit interesting there because not all games are enjoyable in the same way, I guess I'll say. I think it's
Like Tarkov.
yeah, I was just going to say like Tarkov. I'd never really call Tarkov an enjoyable experience, but I'd still say it's an experience that, in some ways I have found enjoyment, but I've, liked what I've done through it and stuff like that. But I think
They can't guarantee an enjoyable experience, but they can guarantee the experience they promise, and if that sounds like an enjoyable experience or not to you.
I think the important thing is there needs to be transparency into what the experience is before the consumer or the player buys it. It's the main thing. There needs to be enough information, and it needs to be clear enough that they kind of know what they're getting into, which was kind of an important thing with No Man's Sky when it launched. They weren't transparent at all with what was happening. Versus Tarkov, which is a bit more transparent, or is transparent in the fact that it's going to be rough. They don't sugarcoat it. I'm pretty sure it's in before you purchase the game, it very explicitly says this is a
difficult
experience.
Game. Yep.
It is it won't be easy, and similar things with games that are kind of in Soul series. They don't really sugarcoat or try and sell you that this game is going to be super happy fun time the whole time. You're buying it for a different type of experience, and they have a duty to kind of communicate that. But I think at the bare minimum, I think it gets a bit of a complicated topic because it varies between person to person. But I think a big thing is it's the transparency, but also just the quality of the experience needs to at least meet some level. This is what we're going to kind of see is the main thing between the price point, I guess, is the quality of it. If you're paying a lot of money, even if it's not as long or whatever, there's a quality aspect that goes with that. You're paying basically masters of the industry to provide you with content versus paying amateurs to beginners, and that's kind of what goes with other stuff. If you're getting a haircut and you pay $5, your expectations are going to be different between going somewhere and paying $100 or paying $500 or paying $1,000. There's that expectation of quality and service that kind of goes along with that.
Yeah.
And there is something to be said for not trying to please everybody. I think having a focused vision is often better. And sometimes that means your target market is smaller. It does. But on the other hand, you're more likely to get people who are very interested in following your studio and, buy every game your studio makes.
I think it's a good point as well, as kind of like this changes a lot between you see indie to higher up too, is with a lot of independent and smaller teams, they're kind of making the games that they want with their vision, and if people like them, then most of the time great. There are of course smaller teams that are trying to make games that will be a broad consumer appeal and sell really well, but there's a lot of people who are trying to just make the games that they kind of wanted. And I think No Man's Sky was one of those things that kind of fell in between both, where they started off making a game that they wanted, that they thought would be neat, and then the consumer appeal of all the features that people were asking for and how much attention it got kind of opened them up to be like, oh, we should actually do all that stuff because we'll sell a lot and make a lot of money and then make the game that we want. But then they fell in between. And one thing I just wanted to touch on is they eventually, a lot of people say like No Man's Sky is one of the top 10 resurrections of all time, because they eventually did make the game that they wanted to, because the game sold really well at launch and they had the funding to do it. And I'm glad they didn't just dissolve or take it and run, and they funneled it back in and eventually fulfilled on the promise. Just the way they went about it wasn't great. And I'm not always a huge component on a lot of kind of early access things, but this is kind of one of those case studies where that may have been, a better approach. They know what they want to deliver on. They know what they have right now. They have an idea of how long it will take, and they could have just been transparent and communicated that with the consumer and then priced it appropriately. You get an early, help us fund things now, we'll add these things later, and as we get more and more content and more features, the price of which will reflect. Start at $20, bump up to $30, then $40, and then when you're full release, release it for a full price. And that's kind of the overall vision for most people who want to do that kind of style of things. It's unfortunately gets kind of muddied by a lot of studios and a lot of people who just use it as free early money before a game is done and a way to justify pre-orders and give them content without having to deliver on a full-fledged product later. But early access is kind of a topic we've covered before in other means.
Yeah, we don't have to go too much into it. I think the biggest thing we want to highlight with No Man's Sky is the responsibility of marketing accuracy, which is really their sin when you get right down to it. They had a lot of other issues, but if that one thing was changed, I think their game would have been far more easily accepted.
Yeah, it would have been a much better reception.
Nice to meet you.
Honestly, like, by the time they got to their sort of final state that they're in now, it is basically what they told people. Like, it made it. But it took a very, very long time to get there, and the game wasn't finished when they released. Also, hi, Car.
Hey, Car. Hey, Raiders. Welcome. It's a drastic change from a crap game to the responsibility of developers towards their customers. Hey, Refraction. Welcome. It's wonderful to have you here finally. I've been trying to convince Refraction to come and take part in one of these. Refraction is the developer of PCSX too.
Oh,
The
no
PS2
way.
Awesome.
PS2 emulator. Yeah.
That's awesome.
We love your product. We use it all the time.
Thank you
yes.
for your work.
Thank you so much for all your effort and time. You don't
Big thumbs up.
have any responsibility because you give it away for free, but you update it so much and you do so much work. You're a credit to the name of developers. Welcome. Yeah, okay.
Very cool. Very cool.
So we are right now talking about marketing accuracy as a responsibility of a developer towards their customer. But the biggest thing, the number one thing is marketing accuracy. That's why you see No Man's Sky up there. They told us all sorts of stuff. They didn't actually give it to us. You're basically caught up. That's where we're at.
Yeah, there's a whole discussion that we had that it basically just boils down to, like Dea said, tell us what you're selling us.
Yeah, they did eventually, but their game was credited as one of the worst launches ever until Cyberpunk. We won't get into that. We'll get into that when we get to the AAA side of stuff. Right, indie side. If they had told us we've only finished this much, well, we're talking about like production studio. Yeah. Not an individual developer, but the production studio's responsibility. The people who create the game.
Just to kind of recap on things, we're breaking things down from indie free games and prototypes, moving up to small teams and kind of more inexpensive games, and then we'll talk about AAA. And right now we're talking about indie developers, which typically won't have publishing or won't have the kind of marketing experience that most, of the industry has already. And you kind of fall into these pitfalls of, over-promising and kind of under-delivering. And it's at that point when you have that responsibility to your gamers and your consumers that what you're putting out there is accurate. And a big thing we're talking about too is having transparency to what your gameplay experience will be. So they know, however you price it, the consumer will know what they're going to be getting into and what they'll be getting out of it.
And just as a little plug for a game I love, the game that is doing this the best that I've seen by including a demo is Ultra Kill. Go check out Ultra Kill if you're into shooters at all, if you like Devil May Cry, if you like the old Quake Arena style shooters, go check out Ultra Kill. It's amazing. The demo is free. Go play it.
Yeah, it's free. That's the main marketing point for that one. Demo is free.
Yeah, you don't have to pay $60 to get, jank ass demo access and then
so
you're stuck with it now.
Marketing accuracy.
Yes, I think it's a big one for No Man's Sky. I'd just like to touch on some of the other pillars for free games and prototypes as
Nice
well.
to meet you.
We'll move on to some of the bigger fish out there. So I guess the main thing for that one, and No Man's Sky, we kind of jumped into independent, but they were a small team in inexpensive games. I think they had a bit of funding from that, but a big thing to touch about too is games made by 1 to 2 developers or personal projects and stuff like that. and the kind of responsibility that they have to their gamers.
I think a
And-
good example would be Sultan Sanctuary, for
I
instance,
was actually
made by a
thinking the
team of
exact
two.
same game. Why does that happen?
It's almost like we play a lot of similar games.
Yeah. Yeah, most people would say great minds think alike, but then my buddy's mother would always say morons seldom differ, and I can't argue with her.
Which one we are, we don't know.
A little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. Fools seldom vary. Yeah, that's a good one too. Hot dogs, horseshoes, and hand grenades. Familiar. Yeah, it was purely marketed from live streaming game dev on YouTube.
That's interesting.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to do it for sure. I
So
would
as
I would have loved to see the live streams of Gorn doing the movement code.
into a bucket the whole time.
I can't remember who maybe it was Gorn.
It was.
One of the video games that the developer posted, like how often they got sick making that. And I guess we'll talk about that later when we get more into kind of the special topics. Because VR is a whole different beast now when it comes to responsibility.
Yeah. So on the notes of Sultan Sanctuary, I did want to call out that while they had very, very little marketing around the game, that in and itself was kind of a problem. Because a lot of the players who played the game were expecting something more akin to Dark Souls. They wanted it to be Dark Souls, but that's not what it is. And they could have done a better job of explaining to people what the game actually is. I don't remember if they have a demo for Sultan Sanctuary. Let me check. And Sanctuary. Nope, no demo, just the game itself. So there was no way to check it out without having to buy in and actually play the game, or watching a streamer play it, something like that. That being said, it was generally considered to be a great success, so still a good game, but they had this expectation that people were going to get a different experience out of it than what they actually did.
And it's unfortunate because getting an experience you don't expect really can ruin the reviews and uptake of a game to a community.
Did turn out for the best with Sultan Sanctuary, though. And a sequel's coming, which I'm very excited about.
Right on. Yeah, it was very, very similar. Not exactly like, but very, very similar to what it was recreating. You've never heard of Sultan Sanctuary?
Firstly, go buy it. Secondly, watch Deus's playthrough.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I guess there's something we talked about before. I guess the other side of things where No Man's Sky was over-marketed, and then Sultan Sanctuary was maybe a little bit under-marketed, where you still need to have transparency into what the expected experience is going to be and what the consumer is going to get out of it, especially when you are releasing a paid product and people are going to be giving you money. You do have the responsibility to communicate what they're going to be getting for that before it's too late and they give you that money. Refunds are, of course, are a protected thing and are available, but not always the easiest thing for people to do. And depending on where people live, actually, it depends on their laws if they can even get one, depending after a certain amount of time and all that other kind of stuff. So it's not always I've heard it a few times where people will say, well, just buy it, and if you don't like it, return it. And I don't like that as an approach, because not everyone wants to gamble with their money in return of getting the experience they want. They should be able to know kind of with some sort of reasonable range that they're knowing what they're getting into and won't have to worry about returning the money and all that kind of stuff, because that can be a headache. It's not always as easy as just going on Steam and hitting refund and hoping that you're under the 2-hour range so you don't have to contact support and it's instant. That shouldn't be the threshold. That shouldn't be, it's kind of a workaround, not really a full solution.
Big agree. But yeah, like you said, it's really just down to the individual area laws on that one. What about on an indie level, their responsibility towards accessibility?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, especially when we talk about that special topic. And it's a tough one, and it's one that I think is kind of a whole industry-wide thing, that there's a responsibility for the whole industry to be approaching this and dealing with this. And it's one of the things I'd like to touch on a bit later, kind of near the end as well, to kind of contrast and overview. But accessibility is a really important topic, and unfortunately, with the way the systems are now, it's still a bit expensive for developers to add that, and that's why you don't really see it too common in independent developers. But I would say that every developer, has a responsibility to make sure that, people are, as many people as possible are able to play their game. And it gets, it's kind of like, that's more on that societal responsibility approach of things rather than kind of a consumer, just because it's not great to exclude people from that. But it's also, when you're making a game for yourself, or even if you're not selling it for anything, it is your time and your cost that's going into that. So, it's understandable that a lot of the smaller teams don't always include that. I wish it was something that was built more into the tools themselves, so that burden is lessened off the actual developers and put on the actual industry itself. Things like Unity, Unreal. I'd love to see more tools and more, compatibility put into those products, or more standards put into place, so that, if you're, this is kind of a quick example. If you're, independent developer, you're making a game and you want to add colorblind support, but, you're not colorblind or color deficient yourself, that's quite a bit of research that you have to do, especially to get it right. And it's kind of quite a bit of burden on you to, or time burden to make sure to go through and do that. And even if you really, really want to, it may not always be viable depending on what your time frame is for the project, especially if you're a one-person team. And if you're already using an engine like Unity and stuff like that, it would be really nice to have those things either built in, or have documentation, or, stuff that's curated already that, is a bit more standardized, so you have a bit more confidence that you can go through and use that, rather than just having to kind of Google things and hope that you get it right and not get it wrong, because attempting it and getting it wrong may, end up worse than just not including it at all. So it's, a bit of a issue right now, but I think it's something that should be addressed by the,
the sort of
end
powers that be.
Yeah.
We do like to talk about accessibility a lot, for those of you who are just joining us from CarTube's stream. And one of the things that we like to talk about is those accessibility features should really be standardized across the industry. There should be a set of things that says, this is what you need to have in your video game, and this is how you implement them. B, it should be at a system level. It should be built into a console's operating system, or the operating system of the PC that it's on, whatever system it may be. And C, it should be everywhere. It should be easy, no cost, default to accessible settings anywhere you're making a video game.
Yeah, I'd ideally love to see, like a standardized board similar to how the ESRB works.
Yeah.
But in regards to accessing, accessibility labels, so people who have certain requirements can look at a product and see what it has, and has it detailed there, being like, this game has support for this and this and this, and they can know right away whether or not they'll be able to actually play it. Because it kind of sucks that for a lot of people, they have to pay the money and play the game to realize that it doesn't have the options that they need. And even as something as straightforward as controller rebinding, or axis inversion, is something that can completely change an experience for someone. And it's not as common, or as people think. And for people who kind of know, they can check things like PC Gaming Wiki ahead of time to do it. But it would be a lot nicer if it was just built into the product, and if there's just a label, this is just what it has, built into the actual consumer side of things, so we're aware of. And also, it would kind of add a bit more motivation for the producers to actually include that stuff. If they want to get as many kind of certificates and labels on their product as they can, so that they know it's reaching a wider audience, they'll see it kind of be a bit more standard.
Blizzard is Blizzard. I'm too old and can't change now.
Blizzard isn't Blizzard. Blizzard is
isn't
Activision.
Blizzard anymore. not since Blizzard North closed down. But back on the topic of accessibility, the point brought up by Refraction is very, very interesting in that, how these should be implemented. Should it be the onus be on the GPU manufacturer and their driver, or on the operating system itself? And I honestly think, because those drivers have to be integrated into the operating system itself, it should be on the operating system's onus. Like, it should be their problem.
Yep.
So like Sony would have to build them in at a system level, Nintendo would have to build them in at a system level, Microsoft would have to build it in at a system level, where you can just basically throw a switch and it automatically translates colors for you.
Then the whole UI would work for colorblind people, even on the system level. And that's kind of why it needs to be there for that one. On stream, we've already encountered games that I couldn't play. I straight up just could not play the game because I physically cannot play a game without double inverted stick.
Yeah, what was it that you tried to play for like half a stream and you're like, I physically can't do this, guys. We're going to have to move on to the next game.
Yeah, it was a PS3 spy RPG that I'm still really, really, really wanting to play, and they've taken it off of PC. You can't buy it there, and there's no stick inversion option on the PS3 or in the game. I can only invert one direction, and having to think every time I move the stick and reverse my thought backwards only in one direction, it gave me a physical headache trying to play the game. I
think it's Alpha Protocol.
Alpha Protocol, thank you. That was it.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, couldn't play Alpha Protocol, and I'm very sad because I've heard so much good about it, and I really, really want to play that game.
Sad.
On that note, if you would like to buy a copy of Alpha Protocol, I wish.
So free games and prototypes. This one's like the accessibility note, I think, stands for all developers. Like, it really should be something that is the default. If you really want to hit it out of the park, go with a system much like they implemented in The Last of Us 2. Like, we'll keep the controversy about the game out of this. Their accessibility options are amazing.
Yep.
Like, that should be the standard.
Yeah, and it seems a lot. I'll talk about that too when we get to like AAA and like the power they kind of have with the money and the engines that they build. Is that stuff's on an engine level, so every game that they make going forward will have that same setup, because those are engine settings that you just have direct access to, that before there just weren't interfaces for them. That was always kind of possible. It's just a lot of those settings are kind of hidden, and difficulty settings is something I like to talk about as well when we get up there and stuff like that, because there's a bit of responsibility there when it comes to how people are going to play your game, that you can't expect everyone to. You can have a curated experience that you want, but you have to know that not everyone will be able to have that curated experience. You still need to have a bit of flexibility to allow people to have a bit of room to be able to experience things in the way that they're either comfortable with or the way that they prefer.
It's important.
Yeah, I just want to touch on free games prototypes. We talked about this briefly. It's something just real quick, and it's mostly just as a societal responsibility you have, and it's one of those things where when you're making just a game for yourself, and this was really big in like the Flash era, you don't really have much of a responsibility. People aren't paying money; they're just using their time. So, and it's up to them to use it or not. And we've talked about this a lot of times too, especially when our kind of broadcasting software right now, as you notice, we're very framey and slideshowy, but it's a free open source software.
And admittedly advertised beta.
So like we can't really complain. This is just how things are and how things go, and and we live with that. They don't have a full responsibility to us to make sure the product is working as we'd like it to, and we don't have the ability to fully complain. If we were paying for it and it was a promised product and this was happening, then it's a different story. But this is kind of where free and prototype kind of falls into, where they're making something. It's a labor of love. and all that kind of stuff.
But pseudo,
And what I mean,
pseudo, hold up.
you one
You do sound
could argue.
lovely.
oh yeah, you sound great.
We saw
one
you-
could argue that as software engineers, it should be our responsibility to open a pull request and fix this.
Yeah.
but
but our time too. But yeah, if we were complaining, it's one of those things where I find it's fine to complain, but you have to provide suggestions and ways to fix. If you're just blanket complaints, then you're not really helping anything. But if you want to, bring up issues with something, so at least provide suggestions on how to improve things. Otherwise, you're not helping. You're just complaining. If there's no possible solution for it, because chances are maybe they're aware of that and they haven't thought of a solution either. So a lot of other people, piling onto that isn't helpful. But if someone can provide solutions to that, they're at least working towards, solving that problem. But anyways, with free games and prototypes, there is a societal responsibility, and it's just something that we wanted to briefly talk about. Is you're making free games. It's your time and labor going into making it. You get to make it to your vision, to what you want. You don't really have to worry about if people are going to like it or not too much, because you're not, profiting of it. You don't really broad appeal. You just make it because you enjoy making games. You like it when people experience your games, or for whatever reason. But there is a societal responsibility we want to talk about, which is hate speech and offensive content and stuff like that. You still have a responsibility to not kind of put those, out there into, public markets, not put them into areas where, they really shouldn't be. You shouldn't be creating them in general. If we talked about this before as well, if you're feeling the need to kind of go through this stuff and create certain games like that, we won't list the ones that exist out there that are basically just video interactive versions of hate speech. Talk to someone, figure out why you're feeling this way and why those things are there and why you feel the need to do this. But for actual, even though you're creating free stuff and it's your vision, you still have a societal responsibility to, not, cause other people pain or promote any sort of this kind of hate stuff and throw that out there. If that's the case, it doesn't belong out there with the other games and stuff like that, and it likely will be removed as such. That's kind of the main responsibility you have for, free and prototypes is, you're still putting out to people and you still owe them that, they'll experience your thing and, not experience pain while doing it, or, cause them any sort of detrimental, effects. And this is along the lines of, doing things that have like jump scares even, and any stuff like that seems like they're harmless, can be, quite mean and stuff to people. And they were kind of popular back in the Flash game era, where you're playing a maze game, and of course the thing kind of pops up, and it's all fun and dandy for a lot of people, but for a lot of people that can be a bit traumatizing, and it's not something that is really too accepted nowadays.
Just if you're gonna, it's fine to have an experience like that. Just make sure if you're going to have an experience like that, your marketing is accurate and they know what they're getting into before they download it.
Or even in, I think it was Outlast, they do warn you when you start up the game that there's going to be a lot of gore, there's going to be jump scares, it's going to be tense, and you have to be okay with that if you want to play this game.
Yep. They also make it all very clear in all of the marketing before you ever buy the game. You're pretty aware of what you're getting into when you get into that one. And then you realize how the locker mechanic works, and the game's no longer scary.
Yeah, the locker mechanic and the ability that you can vault and then immediately jump back, and you can run by the person because they've already queued up the action to go and jump over that thing you jumped over. So you just can infinitely juke them out. They can't attack you while you're doing it.
I remember once I've started playing the game a little ways in, I get to a new area and I'd be like, oh no, where's a locker? And I'd be like really tense until I find a locker, and like, okay, cool.
Okay, I did it.
We're good.
I made it.
We're good. Let's just go figure out what we got to do now.
Slight tangent, playing Alien Isolation after Outlast completely destroys that kind of precognition you have. It's you'll go into a locker and it searches the locker beside you. It's like, haha, you're not going to search my locker because you're just going to do this to scare me. And then it just immediately after searches your locker, and you're like, oh shit. And then another time it'll just come into the room and immediately go to your locker, and you're like, okay, well, this thing's smart. Yeah. When we talk about inclusion of hate speech, we're more talking about
Glorifying it. I think
glorifying
is what he's
it,
talking about.
promoting it.
Yeah.
Like I said, I don't want to pull up any examples because I don't want to promote them in any sense, but there are games out there that are specifically, created offensively. They're there, either for shock value or this person believes that this is how things should be, and maybe isn't a bit dense to how society as a whole treats that kind of content. But it's mostly the kind of like glorification of it, or the whole purpose of it is promoting this way or promoting this stuff. And I understand that the aspects of free speech, but there's still hate speech protections in there. You can't target out certain groups and say certain things about them or incite violence and stuff like that. And while violent video games and everything are fine, we're not saying go out and explicitly do this to people and stuff like that. They're still curated experiences. It's mostly just it's different when there's costs associated to games, because you're paying for experience. But free games, they can make whatever they want. It's just that if you're making something and you're uploading it to the public, you still have a public responsibility. The same thing as if you're making any sort of kind of artistic content, whether it's graphics, paintings or whatever. There's certain things that we've deemed in society to be overall offensive, hateful, and kind of detrimental, and to kind of avoid stuff like that.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure everyone in the chat is all in agreement on this. Remember who your audience is, especially a lot of free games, highly marketed toward kids. Not the best market for stuff that could potentially influence young, influential minds.
They get the bonk.
If anybody disagrees, please let us know now. That's where we're at there. Okay. I think we can move on from that one.
Yeah.
We've beat that point home. We'll come forward.
So maybe we talk a little bit more about the large budget games now. The wide audience, highly marketed, big development cost sort of games.
Which is really where the major conversation starts, because this is where most of the responsibility is really coming from.
Yeah.
This is where most of the money is going. So this is where most of the responsibility exists. See how that works?
Yeah, and the main influence as well. They have the biggest influence in the industry.
Yep.
Really kind of driving things, towards places and all that kind of good stuff. So this is the real bread and butter of responsibility, and we start getting into the kind of nitty gritty of things. It's a broad topic to start, so I don't know if
it is. Yeah, we've got a lot of examples. We've got a lot of active, interesting new ideas coming out of chat. Is there any specific responsibility you guys can think of? Yes, they have the responsibility of influence. Yeah, since they have the highest exposure.
For sure.
Yep. So we can write that down first. Influence. We're excited for Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart colorblind mode. We were excited for Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart rapid asset loading, but I'd love to hear more about the colorblind mode. Then you found out it sucked. Have you tried it to say it sucks, or you heard it sucks? Oh, microtransaction games.
Yeah, that's a whole topic.
Yeah,
we could do 2 hours on that.
Yeah, we could do a whole show on microtransaction responsibility. Went full chroma. I don't know a lot about color. That's definitely one of my weak areas.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's kind of one of those things where, like, when we were talking about before, we wish this was standardized, because they tried. They put the time and effort to do it, but it's up to their research and how things go and their implementations. And if it's not standardized, then unfortunately stuff like this can happen where they have it, but if it falls flat, then it's almost worse than not having it at all, because you're kind of giving people kind of that false hope, right? You, like, as you were saying, you were looking forward to it, and then you are disappointed by the actual implementation. Whereas if we had an actual standardized system of this, and different qualifications, because it's not just kind of black and white when it comes to these implementations. There's kind of a range of them, and it's stuff that we saw in a bunch of other games, and even like Tarkov has this, where there's quite a different types of colorblind implementations and kind of the different degrees of accessibility that are there. And it's not just one mode; it's quite a bit of them. And if this was more standardized and what the bar they kind of have to meet, and if there was some sort of review process where they can submit it to a board of members that can say, yes, you meet the requirements, you are certified to say your game has this and this you're compliant to, this accessibility metric, then I think that'd be great, because then you can have trust in that board to, meet that standard. And then when they say the game has it, you just know that you'll be able to experience the game as you can.
Yep. We should also be, while we're on responsibility of that level, we can't skip over Cyberpunk 2077's launch and the seizure issues.
Yes, it was a big problem.
That's a bad one. And again, this is a standardization thing. Like, nobody that worked on that part of the game has any experience or understanding of seizures. And it didn't trigger anybody that made the game, because all the testers have no understanding or experience with seizures. And there's no real standard they can give it to and have people go, oh, wait, this is bad. Don't do this. So it released and people had seizures from playing their game. And that's really, really bad.
Yeah, they didn't even have, I believe, it's one of those big things where, like, a lot of games will have that seizure warning, and it's one of those things where you see it all the time, so it's not always, there's no degree to it, so people don't know, like, how severe it is, and sometimes it's just minor points and stuff like that. But it really needed to be at that part as an actual, immersion breaking warning saying, hey, for stylistic reasons, this is how this has gone. Or even just having a setting and, having that be one of the first things to pop up saying, hey, if you, if you experience epilepsy, or if you have, issues with this, there's settings that will, curate the experience for this. So that, either just have that reduced in the cutscene, or a separate cutscene, or something. And they thankfully patched it before full launch, but it was during the review rounds and journalists that it was really bad. And people were saying it was some of the worst, handling of it that they've seen in a long time, because they didn't know what was coming up. And it's the scene where you go into brain dancing, I think it's called, and it's literally just flashing in your eyes. It was
bright white flashing lights,
as bad as it could get for that.
Yeah.
And then so they changed it and they patched it, but it's unfortunate it had to come to someone, people experiencing that, for that to happen. But it's one of those things where you do have a responsibility that, your players can actually play the game and also do so safely. You're not going to be causing them harm when they're just trying to play your game.
It's a big problem.
What about...
And, I would like to stay on Cyberpunk 2077 for a second here, if we can, because the launch of Cyberpunk was a good example for not only the accessibility stuff, but also a good example for, marketing what you have.
Yeah, marketing. What was the term I used?
Accuracy.
Accuracy. Yes, marketing accuracy was a big issue on Cyberpunk. Big issue. Oh, maybe don't deliver until you have what you've promised.
Yeah. But what they delivered with Cyberpunk was very much an unfinished product from several perspectives. The PS3 edition, basically unplayable. The Xbox 360 edition.
PS4 edition.
PS4, yes, sorry. I'm old.
I remember getting excited for getting a PlayStation for Christmas. So yeah, I'm up there.
Yeah.
My beard does not belie my age.
Yeah, neither does my hairline. It was unplayable on older console generations. It ran like crap. It was extremely buggy. The console ports in general were just not well done. There were a lot of problems with quality, a lot of problems with marketing something that isn't there. It was just not good. And this is something that unfortunately we've seen as a trend in the AAA space. Let's think of, not to name names, but I'm going to name names, Bethesda, and their recent releases. They're either, half-baked remakes of old games or kind of trash, aka Fallout 76.
So actually, you know what? Since we are talking about marketing accuracy and you just said Bethesda, I want to call out the Fallout 76 story that actually played out and nobody paid any fucking attention to. Because here's what happened and here's why that went so bad. They came out and they said, hey, it's a multiplayer game with a live server and we don't want to give anybody an unfair advantage, so there will be no copies of this game available to review before launch. This was their marketing message. And all the casuals went, oh, okay, they don't get it ahead of me. Great! And everyone ran out and bought the new Fallout game and went, the fuck is this? Because nobody got to see the game beforehand. And immediately after the launch, Bethesda released another press statement essentially saying, due to the huge success of the launch style of Fallout 76, we will be continuing this launch cycle on following games. So don't
AKA, no reviews, you just get trash.
Yeah. Hey, you guys all bought a really buggy game. Our sales were great. Nobody really cared. Let's just keep doing this, is what that translates into. And I bet you we're going to see the exact same thing with their upcoming game. I'm calling it now. Okay.
Yeah. I want to finish Cyberpunk 27 because there's
Yep.
a fair bit to
You
talk
go
about
ahead,
there. And then
but I had to get
Fallout
that out.
76, yeah, is a good one to talk about as well because multiplayer brings in a whole other aspect of things. But yeah, it's, as we're saying with Cyberpunk, like it was heavily marketed. I mean, they had weekly videos, live streams even to promote this product, and the developers and a lot of people there, they knew what was coming, they knew what was happening. We knew the delays. And it's never a good sign when a game is delayed by just a month without too much transparency into why it was delayed by a month.
You can't fix anything in a month.
Yeah, anyone who's worked, in games or even just in software, and even just most things in general, like when you're working on, games that take years to make, when you delay things by a month, you'll be lucky to even have a plan of what you wanted to accomplish in that month done by the end of that month. Like there's a lot of stuff going into that, and it, they sold a lot of pre-orders. They had to sell the game eventually. A lot of pressure in that sense, and it was, a big mess. And it seems like they're trying to do the No Man's Sky approach of release a dumpster fire and then put it out over the course of a few years, and then re-release as, hey, we actually finished that game that you paid for full price a couple of years ago, which just isn't great. But they're catching a lot more flack for it since they are a AAA studio and they had that responsibility to be able to put out a finished product. It was a little bit more, it wasn't right, but it was a little bit more understandable that an indie studio with their first game didn't deliver to a full hype, because they don't always have the resources to. But this studio definitely had the resources to be able to meet their promises or know what they were making and have the know-how to basically just not do this. Like this was it was to the point where a lot of kind of industry standards and policies got ignored for whatever reason, just due to their studio size. Like there's a big review process that goes to getting your game onto a console. Consoles are very stingent to what actually can make it onto them, to have that disc ready version. I think it's like the gold disc or whatever went gold, because you have to submit for them to review, and they're not just going to put buggy messes or things that are potentially dangerous onto their systems and put that out there. And they basically said, no, it's fine. We'll have a day one patch. And that's just how things work nowadays. And we just assume everyone has internet access and bandwidth to support that. I can't remember how big that day one patch was, like 20 or 30 gigs or something silly like that.
I think it was the same size as the game, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it was something crazy.
You talking Cyberpunk?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was like 65 gig patch day one.
Yeah. And it was, like I said, that's just, like, there's supposed to be policies in place, and then sure enough, the fallout was the games got completely removed from stores. They weren't being sold for consoles. They got removed from
a store,
from like the web store, and blanket refunds provided and were available, and I believe even disc versions were still being accepted as refunds. There was quite a bit of fallout.
I guess that's true. Yeah, you can count all the brick and mortar stores, but it was pulled from sale on the PS4 specifically.
Yeah, Yeah, and I know that Microsoft and Xbox provided, I think, like blanket refunds as well, because it was like it is at that point basically just fraud. You said you had this thing, and for consoles it was basically unplayable. Like it wasn't that it would just didn't meet your full feature list. It was literally like you couldn't play the game, and even on PC, a lot of people couldn't play the game. Like you had to have high end of the high end hardware, but even then, like the game crashed so much and was so unstable. That's not really an experience. It's not really, you're paying money to have this thing close and not be able to reopen. And, if you don't have technical knowledge, you're just not going to be able to play the game. And you're supposed to just wait 2 weeks for the patch to come out that'll fix this when you already paid your money to play it now is, it's terrible. It shouldn't have happened and should never happen again. And
They didn't sell you the product. They sold you the promise of a product, which is fraud.
A big part of that is a legal responsibility due to the pre-sales. They've already taken your money. They can't back down anymore. They can't hold it back anymore. They can't wait to finish it anymore.
Well, so there's a little bit more detail to that. They can. But because of their responsibility to shareholders, they were pressured into putting the game out that fiscal year in order to realize the return on investment so that their shareholders would be happy. They very much could have held it off until, when did it release? Like November? They could have held it off until like May, and then it would have been a much more finished game. It would have been a much more complete product. But at that point, that revenue would not have been fully realized until the next fiscal year, which then would have resulted in a negative performance degradation for their shareholders. So they were kind of screwed if they do, screwed if they don't. They chose the one that screws them over more, though.
Still boggles my mind that they can still sell Star Citizen. Yeah, that's an interesting... a whole interesting topic in and of itself.
I think that's one of the topic that came up when we first were discussing responsibility too, because that's one of those ones where, you're buying stuff, you're still buying ships and stuff to support, but what are you really getting out of it? So we'll talk about that after 76.
Sure, if we have time. We're down to half an hour.
So, yeah, well. Should be fine. 76 won't take too long. We've covered most of it already, but kind of the same thing again we saw before is, it was marketing accuracy. They didn't allow reviewers access before because they knew the reviewers were going to completely dog on it and shit on it, and
they knew what they had.
The consumers then wouldn't get into it, and so they just decided not to. And for most it's one of those things where they use the weight of the name and the studio to really do all the marketing themselves. Get to a point where people will buy the game regardless because they've enjoyed what they've put out before. They don't really need to always check the review or all other stuff. So they banked on that, and sure enough, it worked. And they made their own launcher and their own stuff for it. And of course, they got to completely handle the refunds themselves that way. And then they, and it was Internet Historian has a full video on this. If people haven't seen it, watch it. It's very enlightening and a bit terrifying to what the process was for a lot of people and how much they really under-delivered. Not just the game, but all the accessories. They promised, a canvas bag. And
that was so offensive. Story. Oh my God. I when I read this one, I was just like, what?
Yeah, and there was even the whiskey, and there was everything. They just the same model applied to everything. They completely under-delivered.
The biggest kicker on those canvas bags is that all the streamers got actual canvas bags as promised.
Well, the best part is that they have actual canvas bags, and I have one. I have the Fallout New Vegas canvas bag, the California Republic one. They have them and have made them before, so they. It wasn't just we went to make it and it was too hard. It's you've done this
before.
You just were I don't know. It was terrible. I'll type something in a second. I'm just trying to think.
just trying to get this out of the system.
where to start? But yeah, it was an unfortunate event of many things. They took one of their smaller teams and took their game engine, which doesn't have MMO support, and then tried to shove MMO support into it. Which have we seen a few companies try that, it doesn't work too well, especially on like tight deadlines. And it's like on launch, it was just such a mess. There's like, I think like a 4 hour long, or I can't remember how long the video is of just every bug on launch of that game, and goes through it all. And their idea was just get as many people as we can just to get it. We'll charge a lot at first, and then drop the price as fast as we can so that it matches the quality of the product. And then what their real bread and butter is the microtransactions inside the game itself. Since it is an MMO, there are server costs that they have to go with it, and launch costs aren't going to support that. They need recurring revenue, and that's how they were going to do it, which is common in MMOs, but usually is just cosmetic stuff, which they said it'll be cosmetic, and I think they're slowly pulling away from that, or even just the cosmetics that are there.
No. It was a month after where you could buy actual gameplay altering things.
Right. And then even just the cosmetics, the price for what they are compared to what you get.
Oh my God.
Is like extravagant. It's stuff that's like pre-existing assets from Fallout 4 that are pulled in and then sold for $20. And the game itself now sells for like $20 or $30. And like, am I, and they kind of put the blame on the consumer. Like, well, the consumer bought it thinking it was worth it. It's their fault. And it's like, not really. That's
because you advertised it as being worth it.
It's your responsibility to, still charge fair. This is why we have consumer protection laws, because that's not something that should be on the consumer, because, it's quite easy to, razzle dazzle and exploit consumers in that way. And if available, companies are supposed to make money. Everyone would do that. Everyone would overprice and gouge as much as they can. And then still say, well, the consumer's fault that they paid that. And it's really like, no, it's your fault for, overcharging and promising this, and then, basically scamming them into spending more money on an in-game skin than how much the game actually cost.
It's called a scam. That's the legal term.
Yeah, it's like you're basically tricking them into thinking it's worth what it really isn't. And it's hard things of they control it, they can set whatever price and stuff they want, but there still needs to be we come down to the societal responsibility of you not just gouging these people because you can, because a small percentage of people will pay that price, which makes up for the large percentage of people who play it. Well, you're now exploiting a small percentage of players to fund the rest, because that they want that stuff, and maybe they maybe they can afford it, maybe they can't. You don't really know. You don't really shouldn't be, putting that kind of choice or that availability for that in there.
Yeah.
Well, and that sort of touches on, whether they can or can't afford it, touches on microtransaction-based games as well. Like, for instance, Genshin Impact, a very popular game. The core of that game is straight up microtransaction gambling. You gamble on getting the characters that you want and the weapons that you want by giving them real money.
Yep.
And the availability and prevalence of that in the industry causes people who have problem gambling addictions to overspend significantly, and can significantly impact their life. Like this can break people. This is a problem.
Yeah. I would be really interested in knowing who it was that actually blocked someone from spending too much money at MTX. That I'd love to give this person shouts out and look at the stuff that they do, because that sounds like a good human being.
Yeah. They also could be covering themselves, their ass.
Could be a CYA. Could be a CYA.
There's certain avenues of, hey, we made this really addictive exploitative thing, and then, my client got addicted and exploited by it. So
while we're on that topic, you got to call out GTA 5 as well. It has to be done.
With their literal casino.
Yeah. They run a digital casino where little kids can spend real money on blackjack and poker and slot machines to win in-game items and money. How is that legal? How can you market this to kids and get away with it?
Well, their CYA is, oh, we don't. This is a R18 game or whatever. We don't market this to children. The reality is, children are playing it.
Yeah.
And it's
If a casino gets caught with a kid in their casino gambling, they get in a lot of trouble. Even though the casino is 18 plus. So by extension, if they have kids in their casino, should they not be in as much trouble?
Oh, absolutely. I completely agree. But that's how they cover their ass.
I get that, but it's not a very good CYA. Somebody's got to call them on
no,
that.
No, it's not.
There's there's still, I mean, like microtransactions that we talked about was a whole thing. Like there's Fortnite, right? The stuff that is kind of marketed a bit more towards the younger audience, and their kind of predatory behavior that was there, and all the kind of stuff that went on there, and it made them $1 billion, and like $1 billion had to come from somewhere, and unfortunately it came from a lot of a younger audience. Yep. Not really understanding the worth of a lot of stuff. It's not always their money, right? Get your parents' credit card kind of became a meme to get your V-Bucks, and they just keep doing it, and it adds up over time, and it's not very healthy. It's not a good way to be raised up on how things cost and how things should be bought, right? It's just completely associated with that dopamine hit, and you're basically just starting to build very, very unhealthy habits.
Yeah, at what point are you no longer a video game developer and you're just a drug dealer?
Yeah, we're just the virtual...
Digital drugs have been prophesized by sci-fi for a long time. Shadowrun has them.
Yeah, and it's... there's more I wanted to talk about for Fallout 76. It was...
Yeah, go ahead.
But the main thing was just that marketing accuracy again, as we've seen with AAA studios. But it was also just the quality of the game. There just wasn't there. It did not match even that launch price. And even though they dropped that price right away, it wasn't a finished product. Even though you're saying that it is, we're just fraud at that point, and as well as just the systems in game, and they started just kind of banning people out wild, and not really helping them, and there's not really much of a support staff. If you're one of the special topics I want to cover was multiplayer, and when you do multiplayer, you have the responsibility of supporting your audience and your player base. You have a lot more that goes into that. You have a community now at this point as well that you have to kind of curate and moderate, and that wasn't really there as well. It was
it was just troll.
It was like, hey,
however you can scam, just do it.
Can we jump on this MTX hype before there's laws preventing this and cash out as much as we can?
People didn't think paying for a clicker/idle game was worth it. FIFA's renaming? Oh, interesting. Yeah,
did that actually happen? I know that they were fighting with EA.
We got a lot of flack for moving to pay for this game model instead of play for free and buy MTX. Surprisingly, people didn't think paying.
Huh.
There's mobile market is a very weird market as well, because like spending for some reason $5 on a mobile game just feels expensive as hell, when there's quite a bit of full games that you can actually get on there. I think you can get like entire GTA classic games like San Andreas and Vice City and stuff on mobile.
Oh, you can buy every Final Fantasy game, every classic Final Fantasy for $25.
Yeah, it wasn't cheap, but I did pay it, and I did finish Final Fantasy VI on the SkyTrain going back and forth from work. So yeah, I got my money out of it.
Yeah, but it's just like the market for some reason, or for the market has kind of become so inclined to just $1 to $2 games or a premium, or a lot of it was just free to play and then microtransactions, because that was just the broad appeal. So it's what people are kind of used to. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who, or unfortunately what it kind of developed into was a lot of people got a free game, and then 1% to 2% of, the audience or people they would even target as whales would then fund the rest of it. Yeah. People who need to get every single skin, people who, like, they literally are spending upwards to 6 figures on these games. Like, I think there really should be a point of how much a certain person could be able to spend on certain types of these games, unless they just have so much money that it's not really a problem to them and it's fine. But like, that's such a rare case. A lot of time it's you don't always have that much money. But even then, like, is your game really worth $100,000? Like, you have a bit of responsibility to really know the worth of what you're putting out there, and not just, taking someone's money because you can. But business and ethics don't always kind of go hand in hand together. Especially when you are taking that money to fund the rest of the game that most people aren't spending any money on. So it's a very unfortunate position a lot of stuff is in, and it's something that unfortunately it's going to have to rely on kind of consumer laws to catch up with a bit.
Yep.
And thankfully we saw that with
somebody's going to have to
crates.
step in at some point.
Thankfully we started seeing that with loot crates, because they were just straight up digital slot machines. And they $2.50 I think was a price of a key for a lot of Valve stuff, which is a little bit more than even some slot machines cost. And you can actually win money with slot machines, and with this you can win nice skins, which you could technically sell for money, but it's an unregulated market that a lot of people get scammed from. So it was like, if you're playing it as kids and then you grow up and go to a casino for the first time, and you're just basically going to have this precognition of you're predisposed to what's basically going to happen to you when you sit down and start using that machine. I'm not against gambling. I'm just against fully exploiting people, and especially when they're younger, and building them up towards that so that you can make a quick profit.
Yeah, I'm fine with gambling. Just don't do it towards young, influential people who don't even realize that it's gambling. Maybe make it clear. Maybe make sure if the parents are paying attention at all to what the game is, then it's clear to them that there are gambling type effects in the game. Because, sure, most parents don't pay attention at all, but with most of these games, even if they are paying attention, unless they've sat down and played the game themselves, they have no idea.
So I'm going to finally jump into Star Citizen. A big thing that we find from...
One thing I would like to talk about as well is Ubisoft's dealing... I always like to call out Ubisoft to make sure people never forget this story, and it's super offensive and is right in context with this, which is when... Okay, so games are sold at different prices in different areas. We all know this. There's different prices for a key depending on what part of the world you are. So what was happening is people were buying keys in cheap areas and selling them in expensive areas and turning a profit. And these people were buying the key and legally buying it through known channels and getting a receipt and being able to prove that they bought it and all this fun stuff. The key works. It's in their Uplay account so they can play the game. And Ubisoft, in a response to this practice, went, well, we don't want people doing this. So they deleted all the games from people's accounts that were bought with keys from different areas. They didn't go after the people that were doing this and count their customers as, well, these people bought our game, they bought it for the wrong price, but, it's not their fault. They bought it thinking. They just went, no, we're going to delete it. You guys can buy it again if you want it at the proper price.
This is one of the many reasons why we don't play Ubisoft games.
Yeah, it's why people ask me about Assassin's Creed, and I'm like, I don't put money into Ubisoft. People forget about a lot of Ubisoft stuff. Yeah, and it's unfortunate, and that is, I don't even know what we fall that under. What responsibilities did they break? And I leave that as plural because I think there's more than one.
Well, it's definitely responsibility to the consumer and societal responsibility.
Yeah, I think there's even some legal responsibility there, I would hope. Nobody came after them, but...
Well, I mean, that's the thing, is this is such a new field that there aren't laws that encompass it properly.
Yeah,
like there should be.
There should be.
There should be, but there aren't.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate thing that kind of comes up with that digital market. It's like you're buying it from the third party, and then your transaction with them is the third party, but then that third party just can cease to exist at any time because they weren't real. And then Ubisoft has to, take those keys because, they're illegitimized, I guess. But I don't know. It's international consumer stuff, international like exports and stuff like that. It gets really complicated, and they did not handle it anywhere near the appropriate line. They just said, okay, we can do this because we have, the right to.
We have access to.
Did it.
Yep.
They didn't care. They didn't think about, the responsibility of the people who, bought that. They maybe just thought, oh, these are people trying to, game the system, or, it's not that straightforward. These are ads that can pop up in people's, pages they go to, or in forums, and all that stuff is served by Google. Hey, buy cheaper games from here, and and you can blame the consumer all you want, but I mean, it's not really their fault if a legitimately looking company says, hey, you can buy this and you have keys, because those things do exist. I mean, I can buy games from Humble and get my keys for Steam and for Epic and for even Ubisoft and all that stuff. Like, it's not an unknown thing, and I shouldn't have to go through a personal vetting process of those things, right? And then they just pull the rug under. So yeah, it was a lot. They unfortunately can do it and did do it, but they shouldn't have done it is the main thing.
I don't know. I didn't follow that one. It's an interesting argument.
I believe it was just recently that basically they're unenforceable in court because nobody reads them.
Which I actually don't
agreeing to.
Even fully agree with, because there does have to be some responsibility and onus on the person who's clicking agree without reading it.
Sure, some, but at the same time, like, you should be able to describe the terms and conditions to which the product that you're delivering is behest within like a page or two, not 17 pages of legal jargon that nobody's gonna wade through.
I agree. There should also be an English quick, like, understandable version, and then if you want to know the legal details, you can dig into it, because the legal details just confuse most people. How many Game Such products have you bought and then couldn't play or use if you didn't agree after buying it? That's a really good point. And if you can't get a refund at that point, then that's all on their responsibility. There's not a lot that they can stand on after that. I'm with you on that.
If the EULA was pre-purchase, then maybe. But
I think you can actually look up EULAs and stuff pre-purchase, but nobody's going to.
Right, but they don't put it in your face.
No. It's usually a little link on the buy page. In fine text, little link that you can click somewhere if you look for it. Yeah, it's not easy to see. And nobody looks for it. I've never heard of a single person actually reading anything before or after they've bought it. Okay. Well, we've beat them a little bit, and I'm happy with the Ubisoft beats. That story's never going to die. Ever since I've read that, I'm like, I'm never going to let this go.
Yeah, that's pretty terrible. That is yeah. But anyways,
Star Citizen, a whole other different level of responsibilities. What a shit show this show is.
This was another one where Deus and I heard their promises and we're like, that game's never coming out.
I still have hope that it will come out one day, but I know it won't be anytime soon. And I love following all their tech videos that they have actually been working on to make this game work. It's super fucking cool what they've been building. It's nowhere near a game, though.
No. The technology is amazing, and I can't wait to see like the third or fourth generation of game that uses that technology. But Star Citizen's never coming out.
Just to think of the whole world being stored as a database of seeds is really fucking cool, though. The gigantic community paid tech demo. Yep, that is 100% what it is.
Yeah, it's a weird model they're going for, and when we talk about responsibilities, it's kind of covering a lot of stuff where, there's the responsibility of the consumer, where they're paying to get access to the game, and you need to convince them that their money is going to be worth it to what they're going to be getting in return, or B, communicating that it is an investment, which is kind of a weird thing because they're not really going to be getting any sort of financial return from it. They're just going to maybe get a game they'll enjoy eventually, which is just such a weird premise. And the other thing is the kind of crowdfunding sort of, being transparent to how the game is going and what's upcoming, and, having deadlines that you can meet, and having stuff like that when you're, asking people for their money and trying to convince them to give it to you. Anything you do to try to convince them their money, you need to deliver on in some way or be transparent with. There's been, it's that same kind of early access approach we're seeing that's quite common nowadays, and it's not, it can be done well. Like Valheim does it really well, and I wish I would have brought that up earlier for the indie games of, it's a cheap price, communicates it well. They're transparent with what the game has. They're transparent with what's upcoming with it and the dates that are coming for the most part. So you know what you're getting into. You're not going to spend that money and be too, kind of feel like you've got taken advantage of or feel like they overpromised. They show what's there and very reasonably for it is for now and stuff like this. They started kind of allowing people to buy in-game items and stuff like that to source it. And I don't know if those things are going to stick around for launch, and I don't know if it's communicated directly that these are just kind of temporary measures to help, something a bit more than just, donating money at the developers to help, get something in return that, is a bit more viable. And I'm not sure, which one came first, if they're using it for incentives or if they just did it so that, players would feel a bit better about just sending money. But with this crowdsourcing stuff, the unfortunate thing is that there's not really, any sort of kind of full-on structure to this project. And, there's no promise to, a certain deadline or what's going to get hit. It's kind of just been an ongoing kind of money pit, and they are working on it, and the tech, as Dave was saying, is super fantastic and is a super broad thing, and it's a really interesting case because it's not completely negative. It's borderlines on the point of exploitative, where you're getting to a point where this happens in a lot of projects outside of games too, and basically any project that has any sort of cost to kind of working or building on it is you hit a point where you can keep throwing money on it, but it may not ever get to a point where it's solved, or it may take so much money where it's not even, feasible. And this happens in construction. This happens in, just software, all this kind of stuff. And eventually, if we hit this point where more and more people are throwing money on it, but it's never going to make any progress, we're now just getting to a point where we're going to be exploiting a community that is sold on a dream that may not become a reality. And, at what point are they just going to cut their losses and move on? Or at what point are they just going to say, okay, it's released. Sorry, I didn't live up to the hype, but here you go. Thanks for all the money.
Yeah.
I can't understand the justification in charging 5 figures for a digital ship in a game that hasn't come out yet. The marketing people that made that decision, they got some fucking cojones. Let me tell you.
Well, I mean, it's late stage capitalism, right? Like, if people are willing to pay for it, that's what we should charge for it. Because there's people out there with so much wealth that it literally doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that's 10 grand, 20 grand for a ship is a drop in the bucket for some people. Definitely. But I couldn't even fathom charging that much for a ship. That I could literally just make copies of. It's not even a ship.
It's the concept for a ship in a game that isn't released yet and has no release date.
And once finished, can be reinstantiated time and time again at the click of a button.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a car. There's no physical material there. Oh, years. Too many years to count. The question was, how long has it been in development for? And the answer is too many years to count. I don't even know anymore. Let me look it up. That's the only way I'm going to give you an answer. When did Star Citizen begin development?
2010, 2011?
Yep, 2011. 2010 began in 2010 with pre-production in 2010, production starting in 2011. So we'll call it 2010, using CryEngine 3.
And they've moved to Lumberyard, which was based off CryEngine, I believe, and have done a lot of things off Lumberyard now, almost making it their own engine. It's been almost 10 years.
Yep.
It's been at least 10 years.
Yep, 10 plus years now. And they can generate a building.
Like the technology that they're putting into it is amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Now, yeah, let me just be clear.
But they don't have a product.
When I say they can generate a building, I mean they can take a seeded number and recreate the exact same building every single time with corridors, rooms, floors, stairs, furniture, all interactable and explorable in every single room, stored as just a string that they can recreate on demand.
The bit packing is incredible.
Yeah, it's super fucking cool what they're doing. And that's basically their plan, is like the whole world is supposed to be the same for every person to visit it, and you can run into other people there. So everyone needs to know what it is and how to draw it and how to put it together, but the universe is so big that you can't give all that information to the person at the same time. So they give it to you in seeds, and then they use essentially a smart algorithm to build the building off the seed, and as long as the seed doesn't change, the building doesn't change.
Procedural generation
Of an entire universe.
and the way that they're doing it is so freaking cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very, very cool. That's where all the money's going. Great tech. I wouldn't put my money into it. I'll wait for next gen, maybe third gen. Then I'll buy the game that comes off of it, and I'll be hyped.
When the game actually releases, I probably will buy it.
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna want to see it. But
That was a change in lighting, Rube, and green screen effects with varying lighting.
Yeah, it happens.
The tech is phenomenal. That will go to other studios. Yeah, and absolutely. If it does drop, I'm buying it as well, 100%. And Pseudo's buying it, I guarantee you, to check it out. And we will just start streaming. We'll all just jump into the cheapest little attack ship we can get and just go rob people. just
Space
straight
Vikings.
up space Viking people. Just watch for people that are trying to haul ore and take them out. And once we get a little bit stronger, then we can be mercs and be the good guys and sell our services and guard those people we used to rob. More to the point, you absolutely would pay for the tech to be developed by its being sold as a game right now, not as a game in the future. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we love the tech. We like what they're doing. We think it's a great idea, but we think they need to clearly market themselves again. I think marketing accuracy is what most of everything we've talked about keeps coming down to. Tell people what you're doing here.
Marketing accuracy and quality of product. Like, the product needs to do what it says on the tin, which is one of the things we called out with No Man's Sky, is that when it launched, it didn't do what it says on the tin.
Yeah. Yep. Marketing accuracy. Yeah, that's everything that's going on with Star Citizen. And again, pretty much my number one complaint. Pseudo jump scare.
Okay, I want to see this.
I'm very curious. I wasn't paying attention. I was researching things. quick spoop. Quick little spoop there.
Yeah. That's because Pseudo uses his monitor as a light source.
Not anymore. So
you got the ring light going on too?
Yeah, I've got a few lights going on now.
Oh, nice.
But the problem is that I've got a giant 32-inch IPS monitor right above me. So if I open up any sort of page that's just white or any sort of light,
Oh yeah, there we go.
then, it's just so bright that it just causes that to happen.
I should give you the spare L132B that I have that's not being used. That'll fix your issues. You can just balance to the brighter level. The monitor won't even make a difference.
Yeah, I just don't have my key light set up right now.
That's how mine is right now. Like, mine looks like this beautifully lit room, and I'm actually in a fairly dark room with just a couple really bright lights in front of me that make sunlight level light. It's broadcast lighting.
I don't have because I'm still adjusting my setup, but I have my key light, which I have off, because if I turn my key light on, then we go spoop.
Oh!
So I need to get a diffuser on it, and then also known as a pillowcase, and then just balance some things, but I just haven't had time.
Yeah, I feel you, man. People that don't stream do not understand the lighting struggle. So much work goes into properly lighting a stream camera. Oh my god.
You can also do it fairly easily, though. You can, my overhead light is just a 5400K daylight light, and then I've got the ring light. It's pretty clear. I should probably light my green screen because, like, the green down here.
Yep, getting rid of all that stuff was a PITA. My green screen is on point now, though. None of that natural crap. I need sunlight. I need sunlight level lighting. Soft sun lighting for broadcasting. It's what the cameras prefer. And these lights that I have, let me pull this one off here real quick since I'm talking about it. Here's what they look like. Plug it. They can take a battery too. They can go right on top of like digital cameras and stuff for lighting. But the type of light that they put out is such that if I shine it into the sun lit areas of the house, like when it's sunny out, and you just shine the light at it, you can't see it. It just vanishes. It's identical to the sunlight, so it's like it's not even on. It's really cool. I love them. It must be off. You sleep well, Rube. I know it's late there. Or early. It's probably early. It's probably like 3 or 4 a.m. or something crazy. Philips Hue in the house, huh?
Nice.
So it is whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, I think we've talked a bit about Star Citizen. It's kind of the same things that a lot of stuff are falling into, especially with the early access model where I think it's $45 now to get alpha access, which is like the price of, quite a few games. I think we paid $40 or $50 for New World. And they're communicating, that it's alpha and all this other stuff. But, the responsibility is that you need to eventually deliver on that dream or have it at least be worth that money if you're charging for it, or set it up as an actual investment and give them some sort of collateral. If you're going to ask them for their money, you're basically just asking people to throw money at you and then never really actually having any sort of obligation to provide what you're promising, is the kind of pattern that we're finding with this.
Yeah, so transparency, clarity, and don't be a scummy person and break the law.
Rabble capitalism.
Also, don't give children gambling.
That's what I mean by scummy person and break the law. But yeah, it's nice to call that one out specifically. Isn't there a huge battle early last year where people lost boatloads of money in the game?
That might have been
that was in Eve.
Yeah. That happens in Eve all the time, and those are wonderful stories. I love Eve. I just hate playing it.
Yeah, Eve at least is released, and it's very transparent in the sense of what you're getting out of it and the money that you put into it. It is, quite a bit of money, but it's not like, it's very clear that, you can lose this, and they're, not using it as a funding method of finishing their product. They're just using it as you're funding servers and ongoing maintenance costs and stuff like that, and not saying, hey, you buy this, you buy half a car now, and in 2 years I'll finish the car for you, and it may or may not be what it looks like this picture I gave you, kind of idea.
Most of the ships in Eve are really not bought with money. They're all attained in-game through trading and in-game stuff. It's just there is I believe how it works is you can buy currency for the game, and then they work on the currency value of the ships for their real monetary value when they're talking about those wars. So it's mostly people's time and savings and scammings and robbings, because that's what Eve is about, that has allowed them to get these ships, and then when the ships blow up, they've got to replace them all and refund them all and fix them all for the ones that were damaged. So that's how they get the real world cost to these battles. But it's really just massive in-game battles where people have been saving forever and owned these ships for a long time and just trying to defend resources and territories and assets. Which is really cool. Really cool. Eve has some of the coolest MMO stories out there, and it is the best spreadsheet you will ever play.
Very much spreadsheet.
Yeah. One last thing I just wanted to cover on before we wrap things up is just multiplayer games, because they kind of stand on their own across, free indie and AAA, with the responsibilities they have to their players and their consumers. And similar to stuff we touched on above, is just making sure that, the community is at least curated in some sense or moderated in some sense, or at least there are tools
Moderated.
there that allow the community to at least have some sort of self-moderation or allow the user to be able to self-moderate. And what that means is basically it's something as simple as a mute, being
Yep,
able to
ignore
mute,
functions.
ignore functions, filters, all that kind of, it seems like a standard, but there are some games that don't have it. But it's even if it's on the free sense, it's still, like we say, it's a societal responsibility. You don't want to curate an area that's just going to be, a breeding ground for just, bullying or just kind of hurtful or mean content. And the same goes for, indie to high level studios when they make games. You need to make sure that, you're not making tools that people can use to exploit or, hurt others, or, giving the ability for the players to be able to, moderate.
I know where those comments came from.
The content that comes in and stuff like that. I probably should have typed that as I was writing it. So I'll do that in a sec when my brain calms down. But yeah, the main thing on that is that the responsibility to the players is basically just being able to have a safe environment. If you don't have the time to curate that yourself as a developer, making sure that the tools are there so that the community can do it, as well as the tools there so individuals can, have control. Because there's nothing worse than playing a game where you can't mute or silence someone and then they're just harassing you constantly to the point where, you can't play the game, or even if you, to the point where, you don't feel safe.
Yeah. Toxic environments are a sure way to kill a lot of multiplayer games. Some games thrive on it, though, somehow. Looking at you, League of Legends. Looking at you.
They actually disabled all chat.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons why I bring this up.
Why am I not surprised by that one?
Yeah, like nothing really great was coming out of that. And that's what was interesting about a lot of multiplayer games now getting VoIP, is that it's a lot harder to
That's a
to
bad
filter.
one. It's a bad
At
one.
least with text, you can apply a lot of keyword filtering and get around a lot of that stuff, as we saw with like games like Club Penguin, where a lot of keywords just instant ban you and remove you from the game because it's a kids game.
Yep.
That language is not appropriate.
Yep.
With VoIP, we do have technology to detect things, but it's not to the point where it would be reliable enough to detect certain things and send out bans accordingly. So it's going to be real interesting as the technology's there now for a lot of MMO games to get VoIP. I know New World's supposed to have it, and they had it for a little bit, and then it just doesn't work anymore.
Gee, I wonder why.
But it's going to be...
There's apparently a plan for Tarkov to get voice, which I think is a terrible idea.
Yeah.
That's the worst community to get voice. Just even showing the other players names is offensive enough in that game. And as much as we absolutely love Insurgency Sandstorm, that also has VoIP by default, and there's some edgy people in that community too.
Yeah, I just turned off the receive volume for VoIP.
Me too. Which is sad because there are some really cool and genuinely interesting people that we've played with and wouldn't mind getting to know a little bit better possibly, but just the one ruins it for the many, and there is those ones out there.
The odds of not having a toxic person in your lobby are unfortunately pretty low.
VoIP should absolutely be proximity, though. Well, I mean, there is the argument of Battlefield headsets with radios and stuff. They're an actual thing. They exist.
Yeah, a lot of games do the proximity VoIP. Like I know, that's what Insurgency has, is proximity VoIP. Same with like Hell Let Loose has proximity VoIP, but those are at least kind of team-based games. But you still will find people who will just they get upset or they're frustrated with you, and then they'll just kind of go off the handle, or they're just terrible people in general. But if you have the ability to mute and report, that's great. But thankfully that's there, and if there's bans, then even better. But at the very least, if you're making multiplayer games, at the very least you have to have some sort of moderation tools and curation
with the risk
to players.
Or with the risk of this going a slightly long, I gotta bring up one quick thing. What about developers re-releasing old beloved games and taking things out that the community loves. Like, say, the backwards jump or double jump bug in Mario 64 that all the speedrunners relied on for the re-release.
Still buy it.
Yeah, I think at that point it comes down to the consumer decision, right? They're allowed to make the game, that they're making, and the consumer's allowed to, purchase based off what they want out of the game. And if they want to be able to speed run it and that's not in there, then they don't have to buy it. And it's unfortunate. But at that point, they're making a product, and it'd be different if they had already sold the game, or if it was, a re-release or something that was promised and then not delivered.
Yeah.
It's not there, but it's one of those things where, people can make the game and they're not entitled to anything that's explicitly in the game unless, they were promised or told or sold on that. When you start having that transaction happen, then there's a bit more entitlement. If they said it's,
especially when that thing is a bug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It gets a bit muddy when, you do a remake or a remaster and then you start changing a bunch of stuff and you change the experience as a whole, and then you still sell it on the previous experience. That can get a bit different. And,
yeah. So again, we're just boiling once again down to marketing accuracy.
Yeah.
If you're gonna make those changes and do stuff like that and take things out of the original game, then just make sure people know what they're getting into.
I will say, though, I did love that Blue Point basically kept all of the AI and animation data for most things, and all of the bugs still work, and it's hilarious.
Yeah, and I think that is the perfect way to handle a remake of that game. The fans are fervent and passionate, and you can't change it too much. I mean, even the little changes that they did make, people already complained about, said they ruined the game. So
yeah.
They changed Adjudicator's music. They ruined the video game.
Yeah.
New Adjudicator's music is good.
Yeah,
It's just not the same.
It's different, very different. It's actually, the music actually fits now. Is the big thing. It was so odd before, not bad, just
Goofy.
odd.
Goofy
Yeah,
is the word that I would use to describe.
Yeah, goofy works. Anyway, I'm glad we got to touch on that a little bit. Personally, I'm saddened when they take things out like that, because there's a whole community around the game that loves the game and still plays the game all these years later because of these things. And it feels kind of like a thumb up at the nose at all those communities, to me.
Especially if it's, something that you don't hit in a casual playthrough, if it's like a bug like that. But it also could get more complicated. If it's a modern remake of that, they would have to go out of their way maybe to add it.
Yep.
Maybe it isn't something they just, patched out. It's just, the modern tools and modern player controllers just don't really allow that kind of, physics bugs to happen, because we have a lot better physics calculations. And then for them to add it, they would have to go in and kind of recreate it, but maybe they wouldn't be able to recreate it at the same kind of level as it was back then, because it's, completely different code and completely different hardware.
Was this a remaster or a remake? I thought it was a remaster in the Mario one. Mario 64.
Yeah, but
Pretty sure it's a remake.
It's a remake?
Yeah, well, the problem with that is that, that stuff was made specifically for that console.
Yeah, I understand. There's levels of change that are going to be needed to make it work in the new environment, and it's possible that those levels of change did it. But I'm assuming the other way, based on Nintendo's previous behavior and attitude towards this kind of stuff lately.
I can kind of see it both ways, right? Like,
yeah,
Nintendo definitely wants to take the lowest cost path, because they're a company. They're motivated by profit.
I'm fine with that one.
But the lowest cost path in this instance, getting it to run on something like the Switch, I would imagine, is probably just remake the game in a modern engine.
Yeah, it'd be like, the remasters of NES games, they're no longer going to be 1 megabyte in size, because it's a completely different thing like going there. And to make it to that
they're
same
using
degree,
much higher end resources at that point. So,
and also just we have more hardware and more tools that we don't have to do a lot of the same kind of cheats that we had to do back then, which was things that opened up for the certain bugs to occur, because there was just limitations. So we would have to kind of limit ourselves. It would be just a it sucks it's not there. It's understanding why it's not there. But I don't think they went out of their way to just patch it. It was just the product of modern game design and game making is this, those things just aren't really as common or aren't really there.
So I think in summary what we're saying is, hey Nintendo, how about a war dev log for the remaster/remake of Mario 64? That would be wonderful. We'd like to find out why you made these decisions.
That would
just
be
tell
neat.
us and we'll be happy. And yeah.
I would love to be able to just like learn watching them take an N64 game and put it in a modern engine.
Yeah, I mean, you don't even have to show me how and give away all your tricks. Just talk about some of the pitfalls you ran into, like the war dev logs from Dead Space were fantastic. Wonderful reads, wonderful case studies. But you can still go back and play the original on the old hardware. Yep, you can, and that's what most of the community does.
Have it, but you can't purchase it, which is the tricky part. Like, I own a copy of Mario 64. I own an N64. I own N64 controllers. I own the expansion pack, blah, blah, blah. I physically can't hook it up to my TV. I don't have the inputs required.
So
I had to buy, I bought a RetroTink. I bought one of those ROM loading cartridges that I can just stick an SD card in, and I bought some Brawler 64 controllers because it honestly made it easier to play the game. Those, like, I cannot get from Nintendo the ability to play Mario 64 again. I can't.
Yeah, you're not buying it from Nintendo anymore. You're buying it all third party in different sources, in different states of work. And a lot of N64s don't work anymore.
I think I'm more interested, or more not interesting, but more. I'll research this a bit, but I'm wondering if there's ever a case where, in the modern era of games, there was speedrunning techniques that get patched out later, and I'm sure it's probably happened a few times.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's
all
something
the time.
that I would think
all
that would
the
be,
time.
You know, something that's a beloved mechanic that then just gets, you know, removed. And one that I'm thinking of that might come up is New World. If you have light armor, you can do something called a roll cancel, where you take out your weapon while rolling, and it cancels out the last couple frames, which are supposed to stop your player, and it allows you just to move faster. Which, I mean, you know, it's exploiting their design because they didn't want you to be able to move faster than everyone else, but my god, it allows me to get around that map with no mount quick, and the moment they remove that, I'm going to be very sad and very salty, but, you know, understanding that that wasn't their original intention, and it's just a bug that people found and started using, and
that,
you know,
that one I understand fixing because it actually gives certain players an advantage over others, because me as a tank in heavy armor just can't do that.
Yeah.
Well, and there's also things like the game that isn't Valheim
There's a lot
with
of
the
those.
survival.
That
we
doesn't
played
narrow
recently.
it down. Oh, Conan.
Conan, yes, Conan.
When you said we played recently, that narrowed it down.
Yeah, the game with the survival that isn't Valheim. Lobos used to speedrun that. He would just speedrun it and beat all the bosses and hit the end condition. And the developers actually patched out quite a few of the tactics that he was using because they did.
Yeah, we've seen it before when we watch the developers watch speedrun videos where they see a speedrunner doing an exploit and go, "Oh, we got to fix that." That's a lot of their mentalities. That's broken, and we got to stop them from doing this.
It comes down to there's a curated experience that they have in mind that they're trying to create for you, and then you can kind of break that, and they understand that, you know, a lot of people enjoy doing it and some are doing it, but they want to, I guess, make sure that it doesn't get to the point where that just becomes the default way of doing it. I think
that there's a balance to strike there. Like, some of the stuff that's really heinous and really easy to do, yeah, sure, patch that. But if it takes enough setup, I'm of the mind that, like, shit, somebody found that, I'm not patching it.
Yeah, and that's we go back to this video time and time again, and I'm going to call it out again. When the Doom Eternal id team watched the speedrunners break their game, their reaction wasn't, "Let's fix that." That was, let's put a message up there so they can see it when they do that.
I
Or like put purple goop in the sky so they get stuck and stop moving so quickly.
Yeah, give them extra, you know, hey, speedrunners, you found this area to try to break our game. Well, here's some more obstacles for you guys to have to avoid in order for you guys to do your own little competition is kind of what their approach is. And that's just once again showing what kind of level those developers are on for making games fun for people.
Yeah, it really depends on how big the exploit is. Like when we talked about Conan, we found an issue with one of the keys where if you
that has to be patched.
Pull out of the chest and use the scroll wheel to grab it instead of using like the interact button, you'll grab the item without consuming the key, and you just keep doing that, which basically meant that we just have a chest full of legendaries, which greatly reduces
the game.
The difficulty curve, which is something that they've designed intentionally, and it's one of those things where you still need to kind of save players from themselves at certain things, because like, given most things we just want everything now, but we don't really think about the full experience, and all of a sudden we're like, well, I finished this in 2 days and now I'm bored. And it's like, yeah, well, it would have lasted you 2 weeks if you didn't exploit that, but we want to get good as fast as possible. That was a method of doing it, and without that guard in place, we're just going to do it. There's a few times where you can say, like, there's a few exploits in games I find like I'm not going to do that because I know it's going to ruin the experience for me. It's the same thing as like back in the day, you could get cheats for most games, turn on God mode, infinite ammo, and all that stuff, and they're fun, but
Game Genie.
They kind of ruin the curated experience. Then it's a different experience. It's not really like a bad one. It's just not the one they really have intended.
And those experiences on those curves, in those times, in those patterns, take weeks and weeks and months and months and months of work and playtest and stuff to figure out. So I can understand why some of them get a little salty when people just break it and they're like...
And there was some... It's something that we see within the community as well, and through no fault of the people in the community, but when we were playing Tarkov on stream, we had quite a few people drop in and say, hey, can we help out? Can we drop you guns? Can we drop you items? I want to help you get into this game. But that also breaks the curve. And we had to, well, at least I had to, I don't know how it was on your end, say, hey, thanks so much for the offer, but I'm gonna do this myself. I want to get this done by myself. I want to have that struggle. I want to have that experience. And it's something that through no fault of the developers, you can still have that experience broken for you. It's much like if I were to jump into New World now with you guys and you didn't spin up new characters to play alongside me, I would just kind of be useless and be riding on your coattails for a long time.
You would actually just have to go and do your own thing to catch up to us is really what that would boil down to.
Yeah.
Or like just getting power leveled. I mean, that's a big thing in MMOs is that you get power leveled, but then you don't really learn
multiplayer games experience. Period, not even just MMOs.
Yeah.
Power leveling's been around since D2 and all that stuff as well.
Yeah, and it's one thing, you don't get the full experience, and then you get to the end, you're kind of confused. And I remember that was a big thing with Conan, is when I first played it, I joined in midway and I had no idea what was going on, and even though I had gear and everything, I was confused. But then starting from scratch myself and going through the process of the feats and going through that, everything started making a bit more sense, and figured out what materials to actually gather and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, like when I got good at Diablo 2, I could get to level 80, 85 on a character in like 2 days. It wasn't hard. Just join the right games, tag along. That was it. Anyway, my food's here. We've gone late. It's been a great show. I really liked the topic. Thank you, GlenCon, for the topic. Digital Loop, thanks for hanging out. So nice of you to join us today. Zelo, always nice to see you. Bored. We'll be back later with more. Rube went to bed. There's been some others. Everybody that's been lurking, I hope you all had a great time. Thank you for the inputs. I'll be playing something tonight. I've been playing a lot of New World. I kind of want to level, but at the same time, I kind of want to play some games with Rage as well. So, want to do some dwarves?
Yeah, we can do some Diggy Dwarves.
Since we were talking about it, do some dwarves and maybe Risk of Rain 2. Yeah. Since we've got a new content update coming for it. I think it's an expansion even.
Yeah, it's coming 2022. I'm excited.
Hype. But we'll be back later after we eat the foods. So you all have yourselves a fantastic evening. Until later, I'm Deus.
Rage.
And I'm Pseudo.
And may all your shots be head